When my parents died in a car crash, my world collapsed in a single night. Just moments before, they were driving home from a weekend trip, and the next, I was standing at their funeral, clutching the hand of my 12-year-old brother as he cried into his sleeve. I expected support from my husband, but it never came. Instead of warmth, I met cold indifference, dry remarks about documents and formalities. In that moment, I realized for the first time that the man beside me simply didn't care. And yet I still lived in an illusion. I believed we could get through it together. I didn't notice the tiny cracks that would later grow into a canyon. I didn't understand that behind my husband's smile hid a cold, calculating man. I couldn't have imagined that one day I would sit on the floor of a stranger's apartment, holding my brother against my chest and whispering, "I'll never let anyone take you away, never." And now, holding a letter from a law office where it states in black and white that I am the sole heir to the estate of my husband's father, I finally understand everything I went through was not in vain. So, this is where my story begins. My name is Sarah. Just a couple of years ago, I was an ordinary girl. Maybe even too ordinary, the kind people describe as modest, kind, a little naive. I was only 20, studying at college in Ohio, writing term papers late at night, and dreaming about the future. I had a husband, Mark. He was 8 years older than me, and he seemed like my anchor, my protector. His confidence was magnetic, his calmness felt like a shield. He could smile in a way that made me believe, in that very moment, that everything would be okay. Our marriage looked proper, almost ideal. We rented a tiny apartment downtown, cheap wallpaper, an old fridge, windows that groaned when you opened them. But to me, it was a nest, our little space filled with the smell of fresh coffee in the mornings and the muffled laughter of neighbors behind the wall. In the evenings, we would sit together, watch shows, and I'd think, this is happiness. Maybe not glamorous, but mine. Sometimes I caught myself looking at Mark with gratitude. I had always been the youngest in the family, watched over by my parents. But now I had a husband, a man who took care of me. I felt safe. Even when he made sharp remarks, "You spend too much time studying," or "You trust people too easily," I brushed it off as tiredness. People in love always find excuses. We had been married only 2 years, but I was already making plans, finish college, find a job, save up for a house. I pictured us 10 years later, Mark confident and established, me teaching, with kids running around while he taught them to play basketball. My future looked like a straight road to a golden horizon. And in that picture, there was always one more important detail: my little brother, Leo. Back then he was only 12. A funny kid with messy hair and mischievous eyes. We didn't see each other often since I was in school and he lived with our parents in the suburbs. But every Sunday he called me. I'd always hear his laughter on the line, his stories about school, baseball, or how he argued with Dad that he could run a mile faster. Leo was my mirror from childhood. Looking at him was like seeing a younger, braver version of myself. He adored our parents, especially Dad. Baseball bound them together, evenings at the stadium, the smell of hot dogs and popcorn, the roar of the crowd. Leo always carried around a worn baseball that Dad had kept from his youth. I remember how he once brought it over and proudly showed it to Mark, waiting for approval. Back then I thought, one day we'll all be one family. Mark will accept him, and everything will be perfect. But I was wrong. At the time, I didn't understand that life was about to test me in ways that would destroy all my illusions. That my marriage would turn into a cage. That behind my husband's smile was a cold, calculating man. Back then, in the beginning, I lived in an illusion. I truly believed the man beside me was the one I'd build a future with. I didn't notice the tiny cracks that would later grow into an abyss. I remember one morning. I was in the kitchen, frying eggs. The room smelled of coffee. The radio played softly. Mark walked in, kissed my cheek, and said, "You care too much about other people. Focus on us." His words slipped past me, but now, looking back, I realize they already carried the message that would become his manifesto. He wanted me to live only for him. At the time, I thought it was love. In reality, it was the first chain he wrapped around me. I don't share this for pity. I share it because my story is about how an ordinary, lost, trusting girl turned into a woman who learned to fight. I lost my parents, I almost lost my brother, I almost lost myself. But I survived. And now, holding a letter from a law office, where it's written in black and white that I'm the sole heir to the estate of the man who was my husband's father, I finally understand everything I went through was not in vain. But before I tell you how I ended up here, I need to take you back. To the beginning. To the day when everything still seemed normal. When I still believed my life would be simple and happy. In the beginning, life felt smooth, like the still surface of a quiet lake. Mark and I lived simply, without much luxury, but I had the sense that everything was just beginning. I loved waking up in our tiny bedroom when strips of sunlight slipped through the old blinds. The room was small, just a bed, a wardrobe, a few photos on the wall, but to me it felt like an entire world. I saw the future in it. Mark worked at a local company, handling financial reports, always proud of how he could keep everything under control. His confidence was mesmerizing. To me, it felt like I was with someone who knew exactly where to go. When he came home in the evenings and neatly laid his blazer on the table, I felt like I was standing beside a grown, dependable man, and I was his beloved woman, the one he was ready to give everything to. I was in my final year of college. My days started with lectures, then working on my thesis, and the occasional side job. In the evenings, Mark and I cooked dinner together. He fried the meat, I chopped vegetables, and in those moments, it felt like we were a team. Sometimes he told me about his childhood, about his strict father who tolerated no mistakes. His voice carried both respect and a hidden wound. Back then, I didn't think much of it. On Sundays, we visited my parents. They always welcomed us warmly, setting the table with food, filling the house with laughter. My mom hugged me tightly, as if I was still her little girl, and my dad clapped Mark on the shoulder, saying, "Take care of her, son." Leo ran around the yard with his baseball, while I sat on the porch watching it all. My parents, my husband, my brother. Inside, I felt a deep warmth, a certainty that I had everything I needed for happiness. Sometimes I imagined that one day Mark and I would have children of our own. I could already picture him holding a tiny baby, teaching it to walk. I thought he would make a wonderful father. I was wrong. Everything collapsed in a single night. The phone rang, tearing the silence like a knife-cutting fabric. It was the police. His voice was dry and formal, but his words hit me like a hammer. Accident, my parents' car, dead at the scene. I didn't believe him. I kept repeating, "You're mistaken, that's impossible." But reality was relentless. My parents were gone that night. The world turned to dust. I remember sitting on the floor of our apartment, hugging my knees, unable to breathe. Mark paced the room, talking about the funeral, the documents, but none of it reached me. All I could hear was emptiness. It felt like my whole inner world had been swallowed by a black hole of pain. And then I saw Leo. His eyes were empty, like the light inside had gone out. In his hands he clutched the old baseball, as if a piece of our father was still inside it. He didn't cry. He just sat there, staring at nothing. I hugged him, and in that moment he felt so small, so helpless, even though he always tried to act strong. That was when I understood. Now I was his only family. I told myself I'll manage. For him. But I didn't realize that the man beside me felt nothing but indifference. The first days after the tragedy passed in a haze. I tried to make Leo his favorite poster, help him with homework, build some illusion of normalcy. But the atmosphere in our apartment had changed. It was heavy, cold. And it wasn't just grief. The coldness came from Mark. It was as if he built a wall around himself. He avoided Leo. If my brother tried to talk about school, Mark gave one-word answers. If the three of us sat down for dinner, he stared into his phone in silence. Sometimes I overheard him mutter, thinking I couldn't hear, "I didn't ask for this. This isn't my problem." Every word like that cut me inside. I tried to excuse him. He's just not used to it. He needs time. But week by week it became clearer he had no intention of accepting Leo. I remember one evening I unpacked a box of Mom's things. Inside was a small bottle of lavender furniture polish. I poured some onto a cloth and wiped the table. The scent of lavender filled the room, and my heart ached. It was the smell of childhood, the smell of home. But as Mark walked by, he grimaced and said, "Throw that out, it stinks." I looked at him and realized he wanted to erase even the memories of those I loved. Then strange things started happening with money. Bills he hid. Endless phone calls behind closed doors. Whenever I asked, he snapped, "None of your business, I'll handle it." My gut screamed something was wrong, but I still clung to hope. I told myself, "We'll get through this, we're a family." I didn't know it was only the beginning of the nightmare. Sometimes betrayal doesn't sound like shouting or a slamming door. It creeps in as a thick, heavy silence that seeps into every corner of the house. That silence settled into our home the moment Leo moved in with me. It clung to his careful steps, to the whispered goodnights he offered, to every gesture of restraint, as if a curtain had already fallen and the play of love was long over. Leo tried to disappear into the background. He woke before me to pour cereal quietly, careful not to wake Mark. He lined up his sneakers neatly by the door, wrote his homework in a little notebook, and tucked it away like he feared punishment for one page too many. At night, he sat by the window rolling Dad's old baseball between his thin hands, his knuckles sharper with each passing week. I could see childhood slipping away, replaced with the hard necessity of growing up too fast. Mark acted as if nothing had changed. He ate, scrolled on his phone, watched the news. But there was always a chill in the air around him. He avoided brushing past Leo, avoided conversation, responded in clipped words that shut everything down. Sometimes he even referred to him as a guest. That word pierced me every time. A guest can be sent away. A brother is forever. I tried to fill the emptiness between them. I cooked dinner, asked questions, forced conversations about school, baseball, funny childhood memories. But the more I tried, the more obvious it became. Mark never intended to let this child be part of his life. I found myself listening to his footsteps when he came home, bracing for his mood, calculating how long I had to shield Leo with safe, neutral topics. At night, after Leo fell asleep, I sat by his bed and whispered that he was safe. I believed it only as long as I could hold air in my lungs. The school eventually sent a letter inviting me to meet with the counselor. I explained everything, how we lost our parents, how Leo was afraid of the dark, how the house had grown cold. The counselor told me grief is not a straight road, that children sometimes stay in one stage longer than others. She gave me a list of support groups. Leo tucked it away carefully, and though he said nothing, I saw how much he clung to every scrap of comfort. I knew he needed more than reassurance, he needed stability. That's when I decided to apply for guardianship. Mark dismissed the idea with a smirk, insisting it wasn't my responsibility, that the state or some other family should take care of him. But to me, there is no debate. Leo was my family. At Child Services, Mrs. Alvarez listened to me with patience. She reminded me that I was very young, that guardianship carried serious responsibility, and because I was married, I would need my husband's written consent. That word hit me like a shock. I knew Mark would never sign. He didn't want Leo, but he wanted control over me. Refusing meant power. Signing meant letting go. And he never let go. One evening, I laid the papers out on the table. Mark walked in, saw them, and his calmness was so icy it scared me. He refused to sign, calling my brother a problem. The air smelled of lemon cleaner and something metallic, like fear itself. Behind me, Leo stood in the doorway, his eyes wide with unspoken terror. I took his hand and told him we would manage. After that, I gathered more documents, consulted lawyers, and learned that temporary custody could be granted without spousal consent if the child's stability was at risk. And in our home, risk was everywhere, in Mark's words, in his stares, in the oppressive silence. The breaking point came one ordinary evening. We were eating pasta when Leo shyly suggested a movie. Mark cut him off, saying either Leo left or he would. In that moment, I knew. I slipped off my ring, set it on the table beside my key, and walked out with Leo. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. We moved into my parents' old house. It was small, filled with the lavender polish scent Mark had despised. I wiped the wooden table with it, reclaiming the right to memory. Leo slept with a nightlight, sometimes waking in the dark and whispering for Mom. I sat beside him and stroked his hair, repeating, "I'm here." Soon after, I returned to child services, explained everything, and began the guardianship process. A home inspection followed. For the first time, I saw a flicker of confidence on Leo's face, fragile but real. Balancing everything was brutal. I studied at night, cared for Leo during the day, kept the house afloat, leaned on neighbors like Mrs. O'Connor for help. But when the judge finally granted me temporary custody, even for just 6 months, I felt something inside me shift. For the first time since the accident, I could breathe without breaking. Mark didn't stop. He called with threats, even reported me to the police with false claims. But I had proof. I had a document with a seal that told the world, he is my brother, and I am his guardian. Temporary, yes, but stronger than any vow Mark had ever made. A month later, Leo and I stood before the judge again. He told them he was sleeping better, that we cooked together, watched movies, that he went to support groups and spoke, if only about missing Mom and Dad. The judge asked if I intended to return to my husband. I said simply, I had already chosen my family. That day I walked out of the courthouse and felt solid ground under my feet. The world hadn't grown kinder or fairer, but in it I had something no one could take away, the right to protect my brother, the right to stand by him. At home, I framed the custody papers and placed them beside an old photo of us as children by the lake. Leo silently set his baseball next to it as if adding his own vow. That night, we made grilled cheese and laughed at a silly movie. The laughter was shaky, a little uneven, but real. I realized then what home truly was, not walls, not an address, but the ability to breathe freely, to speak without fear, to believe that tomorrow wouldn't strike from the shadows. Life after the breakup turned into a strange mix of emptiness and overload. On one hand, Leo and I no longer lived under Mark's suffocating silence. On the other, everything now rested on my shoulders, the house, work, paperwork, my brother's grief and mine. I knew that giving up school would mean betraying my parents' dream. They had always believed I would graduate. But going to classes while a 12-year-old waited at home was impossible. I chose a compromise. I switched to remote learning. Lectures and assignments now arrived by email. During the day, I worked long shifts at a men's clothing store demanding customers, sore feet, endless hours. Evenings were for helping Leo with homework. Late at night, I sat with my laptop, pushing myself to keep writing essays, convincing myself that the degree was still within reach. We started building a new life. Modest, difficult, but ours. Little rituals helped. Wednesdays meant grilled cheese, Fridays meant movies. Slowly, Leo began to laugh again, at first stiffly, then more freely. He learned how to wake me with the smell of coffee, proudly setting a cup beside my bed and declaring it was my turn to rest. In those moments, I saw the boy he was, not just the child forced too early into loss. For a while, it felt like we were managing, until the world flipped again. It started with the news. A headline flashed across my screen, freezing my hands. Financial firm Underwood & Co. under investigation. Senior manager Mark Williams detained for questioning. I read it 3 times. The words blurred, but the meaning stayed the same. The past wasn't gone. Mark had buried himself in schemes that didn't just wreck his own life but dragged down dozens of others. The savings entrusted to him vanished like a house of cards collapsing. Soon after, detectives knocked on my door. Calm, professional. They introduced themselves, said they were handling the case, and asked if I could spare a few minutes. Their questions were dry. When had I last spoken to him? Did we share accounts? Could he be hiding with relatives? I answered honestly, without emotion. It wasn't a conversation, it was a protocol. When they left, I sat on the couch clutching a blanket. The fragile world I was piecing together had cracked again. But this time, the fracture ran through a man I had already left behind. A few days later, an older couple came into the store where I worked. They browsed absently but walked straight to me. The woman's eyes carried not anger, but exhaustion. She told me quietly that Mark had handled their savings, that they trusted him, and now everything was gone. My hands clenched so hard my nails dug into my palms. I wanted to disappear, dissolve between the racks. Instead, I whispered that I hadn't known and that I was sorry. She nodded. No more words were needed. Nights became sleepless again. I sat in the kitchen listening to Leo's steady breathing in the next room, asking myself the same questions on repeat. How could I have believed in Mark for so long? How had I not seen? There were no answers, only the echo of them circling in my mind. Then came the announcement: Mark had been arrested. The footage showed him in a hallway, hands behind his back, face ashen and hollow. I didn't feel revenge, only a cold clarity. That door was closed forever. Leo saw me watching the news. He asked if it meant Mark wouldn't come back. I told him it meant Mark had his life now, and we had ours. He nodded, then slipped his arm around my shoulders. That small gesture carried more comfort than 1,000 reassurances. Not long after, I received a call from Mark's father's attorney. His voice was calm, businesslike. He explained that the elder Williams was cooperating with the investigation, working to return clients' money and rewriting his will not in his son's favor. He has other plans, the lawyer said. He believes true family means you and your brother. I sat with the phone in my hand, feeling something shift inside me. It wasn't relief, not joy, more like the hush before a storm, when you sense the wave rising long before it crashes. I turned off the phone, made tea, and returned to the kitchen where Leo was bent over his geometry homework. I placed a hand on his shoulder and told him we were managing. He repeated it back to me, his voice steadier than mine. I knew there would be more trials ahead, courts, documents, maybe even inheritance. But that night, watching him trace numbers onto paper, I felt a simple truth. Whatever storm raged outside, inside our home there was light. One morning I received a call from my former father-in-law's attorney. His voice was steady, but beneath the even tone I sensed a weight of seriousness. I had met Mr. Williams SR several times before. He had always treated me warmly, aware of the loss of my parents, and once confided that he too had lost his family as a child. During those rare encounters, he was open and unpretentious. And after the accident, after my parents' death, my separation from his son, and the fight for Leo's guardianship, he had quietly followed my steps. He saw that I hadn't given up, that I was still studying, working, raising my brother, staying active in the community. That I was building a life where his son, my ex-husband, had only destroyed. And as the lawyer later told me, Mr. Williams had said, I wanted to be proud of my son, but I am proud of her. We met in a modest law office. On the desk lay a folder of documents. The attorney, a tall man with graying temples, opened it and read aloud without looking up. I hereby exclude my son, Mark Williams, entirely from my estate. All previous dispositions are revoked. To my son's wife, Sarah Williams, I bequeath the sum of $800,000 as well as a portfolio of Apple Inc. shares with an approximate value of $500,000. The words were cold and formal, but inside me they triggered a storm. 800,000. $500,000 in stock. I sat frozen, but within me everything surged at once: shock, guilt, gratitude, fear, and relief. I lifted my eyes to the attorney. He gave a small nod, confirming it was all real. Leo sat beside me, clutching the arms of his chair. His eyes widened. Is this ours?" he whispered. I nodded. He went still for a moment, then let out a slow breath and smiled wide and free for the first time in so long. "Then we can finally live, really live." Warmth bloomed in my chest. That evening we sat by the window in my parents' house. Outside, light snow was falling in thin, quiet flakes, as if the world itself wanted to gift us a new beginning. On the table lay the papers stamped with seals, and beside them our old family photo album. Two kinds of weight, numbers, and memories. I looked at both and realized this inheritance wasn't about luxury. It was about freedom. It meant Leo could study the way Mom and Dad had dreamed. It meant I could finish my education without collapsing it under side jobs and debt. It meant we could have a home where no one's footsteps made us afraid. "We made it," Leo said, placing his hand over mine. "We made it," I repeated. And in that moment, I knew the story of pain and loss was behind us. Ahead lay our new life. The ending of this story wasn't about betrayal or someone else's mistakes. It was about how even from the heaviest ruins, something solid can be built if you have someone beside you worth standing for. For me, that person was Leo. And for him and me. We sat together, looking out at the snow, and for the first time in a long time, we felt it. We weren't just surviving anymore. We had begun to live. That's the end of today's story. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so share them in the comments below. I truly enjoy reading what you have to say. If you'd like more, check out the full playlist linked in the description of this video. New real stories are on the way, and I'd love to share them with you. Hopefully, I'll see you next time. If this journey resonated with you, please hit subscribe and tap the bell so you'll never miss the latest stories. Thank you for listening, and remember, even the hardest drama stories can end with freedom and dignity.